Welcome back, everyone, to the second session of the Stories We Tell and the Objects We Keep, Asian American Women and the Archives. I am Kimby Phillips, the curator for race and ethnicity at Radcliffe Schlesinger Library. I have the pleasure of working with donors to acquire new collections and my library colleagues to process, describe, and make those collections available to the public. At Radcliffe Schlesinger Library, we are intergenerationally minded. We think about both the past and the future and consider how best to document the lives and experiences of women whose stories have been entrusted to us. And the importance of archives has recently been underscored by a heated public debate about the historical experiences of Korean women living under the control of the Imperial Japanese Army before and during World War II. Archival records can not only support or dispel scholarship, they can also help us to combat injustice, leaving roadmaps of past activism to guide current efforts to fight injustices like the recent rise in violence against Asian Americans across the nation. Now, I was honored to participate in the planning committee for this program with Professors Ju-Young Kim, Ajantha Subramanian, and Shigehisa Kuriyama, and my Radcliffe colleague, Rebecca Wasserman. I am now happy to introduce Vanessa Hu. She will offer another student's perspective on our themes. Vanessa is a rising sophomore at Harvard College studying computer science, ethnicity, migration, and rights. After gaining interest in haikus beyond their 5-7-5 structure, she wrote this piece entitled How to Write a Haiku, pondering how to possibly capture our memories and existences of the past year in any sort of form. Once Vanessa has concluded, we will move directly into our second panel, Preserving Our Stories, which will be moderated by Denise Kaur, Assistant Professor of American Studies at UMass Boston. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
How to write a haiku. I recall last March, perched atop my windowsill, gazing at the yard. Pen in hand, boxes at the door, tuba music in my ear. I am not sure what moved me. Maybe it's because I always liked how CDs stacked into shelves. Maybe it's because I always swallowed the tide a tad too long, and all that resurfaces for air are 3 lines scribbled in the margins. But I was foolish to think that it was just a matter of slotting syllables in step, that it was just a matter of laying arms down at my feet. For all the solitude that Basho's frogs and Isa's cats bathed in from literary suns, I didn't know that these refrains could just be the first strike of the drum, before the winds whistle in with 7/7s. I didn't know about those pivotal characters that sliced yet tethered valleys between ideas, that took you by the hand back to where it all began. And I didn't know how present they were, to describe the season of winter or love, and the session of whatever capacity I am in to see a fox sprinting across a suburban Jersey street, to notice perfect strips of sun through the blinds warming my bed at 1:54 p.m., to embrace the snug of worn jeans on my hips, to hallucinate words with raindrops on the cheek. It was as if I'd sensed that it was never just about the peonies, but the quips of writers now adrift in oscillations. Things that were said, yet were never released from the lips or pen. And so I wonder if that is what burrowed into me across alphabets and revolutions, how I could only hope this bottle would reach where the sirens churned before the language was lost. And I love these dilating garden walls, so much ivy to gather in the palm and twist between the tongue. But I began to wonder, why couldn't the stones topple? Why should I tend to the seasons? Why should I believe there must be any in the prosody of flowers? And why should I appraise grace in inches stretched, times revised, pounds shifted, roots ripped? The calibrations muddy the questions running upstream. To sever the head off a form, does that make an artist? To burn the clouds that sink the canoe, does that create divinity? To speak algorithmic prose that runs past constants, Does that add up to one? And to tie syllables onto branches and carve hollows for notes and lovers. Do the arteries thrum in a novel sort of existence? Ladders splinter into stars and tomorrows slip into the surf. My limbs don't recall how to build castles for the moon to taste and the tide to swallow. Like the songs and mittens sheltering against New England ice, or the lavender and nerves tucked in laundry washed at midnight, or the bitter leaves and laughter mingled in spilled tea at the dinner table. I imagine the poets etch in similar shadows, the silky creases in calendars that can't be pressed smooth. And I too violate the governance of time, skipping moments atop my eyelids like pebbles in a stream, across resurfaced pasts and watery dreams. On top of these linked verses, lean encyclopedias that smudge the graphite. Entries slide out, cutting words that only piece together when I am alone in the attic. Perched atop that windowsill, 4 flights above the shifting dust, I tried to assemble those slivers to lift into the wind. Perhaps all I needed to know was how to send a heartstring through a prism. A cat print in the snow, a nightjar soaring too high, a pearled hail to cup in my hand and let dissolve into shape. Back then, delineating threes and estimating heartbeats, I had yet to know that I still don't know which comes first, the aerodynamics or the desire to fly. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second session, Preserving Our Stories. My name is Denise Kaur, and I will be serving as moderator. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. Renee Tajima-Peña is Professor of Asian American Studies and Director of the Center for Ethno-Communications at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her documentary filmmaking work includes the award-winning Who Killed Vincent Chin, and most recently, the PBS documentary miniseries, Asian Americans. Wendy Maruyama is Professor Emeritus in the School of Art and Design of San Diego State University and renowned artist, woodworker, and furniture maker. Tanaïs is the author of the critically acclaimed novel Bright Lines and founder of the Brooklyn-based beauty and fragrance company High Wildflower. Our session today considers the preservation of objects within the archive. And I'd like to open the session with just a few short remarks. I'd like to start actually not with an object, but with an image. The image that I have in mind is a painting dated from 1818. It is by Caspar David Friedrich, and it is called The Wanderer Above a Sea of Fog. A young man is pictured and his back turned toward us. He is standing on a cliff looking across a fog-shrouded landscape. Nothing is in view here, not the man's face, not the vast landscape he looks out into. A historian described this painting and the view from it as that of historical consciousness. It is a view that is both sweeping and majestic, lifting us out of what is familiar, letting us see beyond our time and place. And it is this that he called the landscape of history. The session today asks us to consider another view of history, to think of the object, something that is tangible and that we can perhaps hold, something that can be kept closer to the heart. Each of our panelists today will talk about the object as a way to produce alternative and even oppositional archives. How are objects kept and for whom? How do objects carry not only individual memories, but also historical memories? How does the archive take shape and offer us ways to tell the multiple and complex histories of Asian American women? After the presentations from our speakers today, they will all come back on screen and join me in conversation. One note about this. Wendy Maruyama will be relying on closed captioning during the discussion portion of the session. She has asked me to share this information with our audience, as there might be a slight delay between my question and her reply. With that, let's get started. It is my pleasure to pass the virtual floor over to Renee Tajima-Peña.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. It's great to be back at Radcliffe. I actually was able to make my first film because of this place. I'd been rejected from the film major at Harvard, and Martina Horner, who was the president of Radcliffe when I was a student, gave me and my classmate Corinne McIntosh, who's a Grenadian American student, she gave us money to go to Grenada and make a film about Morris Bishop and the New Jewel movement. They had just ousted the dictator, Eric Gary. We didn't know what we were doing, but we made a film there. So Radcliffe has always been really an oasis of possibility in the desert that's Harvard. And it's no coincidence to me that it's Radcliffe launching this really important initiative in ethnic studies, and not Harvard, which is still pretty much a backwater of tenure denials and bizarre papers on game theory and sex trafficking of Korean comfort women that can be mentioned. But I'll get to my object. My objects are digital. I mean, they are kind of 3D, if you can see this, for me and on hard drives. But you know, my currency is the visual image when I make films. So today I'd like to show you a clip from the docuseries Asian Americans that was on air last May. And it's a docuseries I produced with a whole team of Asian American filmmakers. And I chose a clip about Patsy Mink, the kind of pioneering politician. I chose it because when I was growing up, my grandfather, Hidehachi Ujie, always used to say that I could be another Patsy Mink. Of course, I was never, but that was his dream. And my grandfather, who immigrated to Hawaii in 1902, he worked on a sugar plantation and cut cane. Then he made his way to the mainland and for years worked at, you know, jobs like janitorial jobs as a stock boy. For 50 years, Grandpa was considered an alien ineligible for citizenship. That meant that he had no path to citizenship because he was Asian. And so I never really realized what Patsy Mink meant to him until I started working on the series. So this clip from the series, and this episode was directed by Leo Chang. It picks up just after Patsy Mink has lost her first bid for Congress.
She lost very badly, and it's very clear that sexism played a key role. People who voted for anyway wrote to me to say, I didn't vote for you because you're not a man. I know that he's going to be able to go to Congress and he's going to be able to engage these backroom deals because he's a man. For her to be basically stabbed in the back by the Democratic Party, the party that she helped to build, was really emotionally devastating for her. But she regrouped.
And down there on the floor, addressing the convention in support of the Platform Committee recommendation on civil rights, is Mrs. Patsy Takimoto Mink. Let's listen to her.
Depends upon your conscience and conviction.
In the back rooms of the convention, Southern senators pushed to water down the civil rights platform. Patsy Mink takes the room by storm in a speech that urges delegates not to compromise. Her presence sends a bold message that civil rights matter to all Americans, including Asian Americans.
I urge you to support the platform as written by your platform committee and to give this nation one of the greatest weapons of peace, the winning of the respect and admiration of the entire world. Thank you very much.
The delegates vote overwhelmingly to stand their ground on civil rights. In 1964, Patsy Mink takes another long-shot run for Congress, once again without the blessing of the party leadership. With an all-volunteer staff and her husband John as her campaign manager, this time she wins.
When my mother was elected in 1964, there were only 11 women in the House of Representatives. And she was the first and only woman of color ever elected at that point to the US Congress.
When I was a student in Hawaii, I was, on food stamps, and I was a kid who had to work, 2 jobs just to be able to get through college. And she looked out for those folks. She looked out for minorities, and she looked out for women. You walk around these halls, she was short, she was easy to dismiss, but she just wouldn't let them dismiss her. What she did for women's rights and equal rights with Title IX a half century ago is a remarkable achievement, not just for Asian Americans, not just for women, not just for people from Hawaii, but for all Americans.
I love that picture of her. So there's an archival story behind this clip that really speaks to the politics of the archive. So we knew from, as we were developing the series, that in newspaper articles, Patsy Mink had come out of nowhere in 1960. This was before she was ever elected. In fact, she had just, really lost badly. But she came out of nowhere at the 1960 Democratic National Convention and gave this major speech to convince the delegates to stand firm on the civil rights platform. And we knew the convention was filmed, but we couldn't find a trace of her speech anywhere, not the CBS archives, no archives, anywhere. But I've been making documentaries about Asian Americans for a long time. And I knew that either 1, we weren't pictured, or 2, if we were pictured, often nobody bothered to index that footage or those images or preserve it. So I told our researchers to try to find the white people who spoke that day in the index. It's sort of like Gina's inversion workaround. And I said, well, look at the footage before them and after, and sometimes you'll find the Asians in between. And sure enough, they found this clip of Patsy Mink. And when I saw it, I thought, well, first we were like elated. Then I thought, well, maybe my grandfather had actually seen this news report in real time. And I'm sure for him, seeing Patsy Mink there, in this national stage really meant to him that a news story could be written by his grandchildren. So the archive is about power, it's about representation, but it's also about change. And it's tangible, visible evidence that we were there and that we matter. And as other speakers have referred to, if we're excluded from the archive, that becomes fertile ground for the false narratives. That's when you get a narrative that, comfort women were gig workers contracting out their sexual services to the Japanese military. That's when you get those false master narratives. So this is really a call to disrupt the archives and make it our own. So now I'd like to pass the mic over to Wendy Maruyama.
Thank you, Renee. I am going to start immediately with a photograph of my mother and her siblings that was taken in 1937, maybe 1938. And you can see that they are celebrating Gorge Day, which was the traditional Japanese holiday. And this photo was taken in San Pedro, which is where they lived before the war broke out. Next slide. As an object maker, the word object is very important to me. I love objects, but I also love to make objects. And I also feel that objects are very sentimental. They can mean so much just by laying your eyes on them. This is some of the work that I made for my exhibition, Executive Order 9066. And as you can see, this is a Japanese doll. Next slide. Entombed in tar paper behind glass. When my mother's family had to leave their homes to be evacuated from California, they pretty much had to give up all their material goods and belongings, including things that they had brought back from Japan. Next slide. Objects were broken in order to reduce the amount of objects that they had to destroy. They broke them, they burned them. My grandmother burned all of the family photographs and dishes and the like. Next slide. So this, you don't see it in the slide, but the doors kind of collide with one another. And in a way that was symbolic of the discord within families that took place during this forced evacuation. Next slide. Objects made. I mean, many of you may know of the beautiful objects that Japanese Americans made while they were incarcerated in the camps. Specifically, these little hand-carved birds. Next slide. I feel like the act of making objects was very therapeutic and perhaps allowed people to sort of escape in their own world while creating these objects. Next slide. This is a very iconic photograph by Dorothea Long, taken of Manzanar. These people were headed for Manzanar from the Bay Area. And you can see that they all have these paper tags that they've worn. Next slide. And some of these tags were saved by people who did go to camp. And so these are examples of the original tags that were used during the Executive Order 906. Next slide. I decided that I wanted to remake each tag to represent each person that was sent to the camp. And in order to do that, I went into the National Archives where I found, it's amazing what you can find in the National Archives. I was able to find every name that was in the database. And the first page shows my family's friends who were from Chula Vista, California. And what was really incredible was to be able to go through all the names and I would see their faces appear in front of me, even though they've been long gone. Next slide. The process of recreating the slides was, the tags was monumental. I had to have these tags custom made so that they were exactly the same size as the original. Next slide. I also had rubber stamps made so that the text replicated the text that was on the original. Each Japanese family was given a number, and so each person was identified by the number. Next slide. In order to be able to complete 120,000 tags, I realized that I needed to make it a community project. I started out by creating small kits that were sent to different individuals and families. A lot of the families requested the numbers and names of their own relatives and ancestors. Next slide. I felt it really important to go to the local high schools because when I was in high school, there was no mention of Executive Order 906. So the recreation of these tags to me was to kind of almost get back at the fact that I was not taught this when I was in high school. So I wanted these students to experience what it was like to write down all these names. Next slide. This is another high school group, and you can sort of see how the organization was for each table. They each had a separate job. Next slide. I also went to the Buddhist temples and the Japanese Christian churches. This was taken at the Buddhist temple. Next slide. What was amazing about being at the Japanese Christian churches and the Buddhist temples was that many of the people who volunteered were in the camp. So they were able to talk to people next to them and explain what their experiences were like. Next slide. I felt it really necessary to take the project to the East Coast, particularly in the South. And so I took the project to Tennessee and had a group of students volunteer doing these tags. Most of them had never really seen Japanese names before, much less write them down. So I think it was kind of a learning experience for them as well. Next slide. After the tags were all made, then they got a nice little bath and coffee to kind of give them sort of an aged appearance. Next slide. I also went to Japanese American senior homes too, where many of the people who were living there were former incarcerated. And it was really meaningful for them to handle the tag of people that they knew. Next slide. This is the final installation, and it was imperative to me that the inaugural exhibition was held in Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas, because we have two camps that were located in that state, Roller and Jerome. Next slide. And this is a photograph showing some of the artifacts that were made in the camp. It was important to me to be able to display these objects along with the tags. And the outcome that I was looking for was so that people could see the sheer scale of, the population that was sent to camp by seeing the groupings. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Now we're next to Tanaïs. Thank you.
Wow, Wendy, that was really incredible. I'm so moved. Like Wendy, I love objects as well, and I'm a writer and a perfumer. And for me, perfume has always been a way to access times and peoples that I cannot access in physical proximity, but I can access them with materials that are taken from the earth. I'd love to read from my next book, Insensorium, and I want to touch on some of the objects of note in this work. So fragrance is something that becomes embedded in textiles, and I'm actually sitting next to a textile from my late grandmother. She stitched it. These are all the little stitches that she did when she was alive. She actually passed away last year, and this is right when, the virus was taking hold, and the conditions that she died in alone without her family nearby, just as I was supposed to see her, really made me think of the arc of one person's life, the objects that they make, the objects that we keep, and how it's shaped by forces much greater than them, and how our grandmothers and mothers pass down these objects that are created as acts of survivorship. So I'd like to read from my book Incensorium, and this is from an essay called Other Tongue. My mother sewed dresses for me and my sister throughout our girlhood, adding her own touches to McCall's patterns that she scored at Walmart. Pretty cotton florals and ginghams, ruffled taffeta and silk, much less expensive than store-bought. We wore our Bengali clothes for a Saturday dawat, parties that our parents threw on the weekend. This is when our double life emerged, when we retired our American selves. We dressed up for these dawats, drawing from our mother's inner sanctum of luxury, textiles and gold, a material culture much richer than so-called fast fashion American clothes made in Bangladesh that we wore to school. Saris hold the history of conquest. Floral Jamdani Muslim saris are the modern-day version of Bengal's mythic, legendary Dhakai Muslim, once loomed in the capital city of Dhaka. Mughal rulers called this bafta hawa, woven air. Weavers loomed this fabric at an 1800 thread count so fine that it could be tucked inside of a matchbox. We hear the story that Dhakai died out because the British chopped off weavers' thumbs and they revolted. Whether or not this is true has been debated. We'll never know for sure. As the British exploited Bengal for raw cotton used in their own factories, they sold these textiles back to the people at much higher prices. Capitalism made Dhakai Muslim extinct, dooming these textiles to live in the afterworld of the museum, diaphanous as ghosts. Whereas fine Jamdani and Katan silk exude elegance, they aren't as available as the Tant sari. Tant handloom cotton saris are iconic Bengal, made from threads of recycled scraps, spun, cut, starched by women, worn by poor and rich women alike, sturdy enough to last a lifetime. My mother's cachet of finery held our secret self, our rich self, our dripping in 24K gold self, our ancient self, our Bangla Muslim self, a shadow self, the war survivor who made sure her children ate every grain of rice on the plate, collected loose change in a jar, saved everything today because tomorrow was never guaranteed. On some weeknights, Ma worked concessions at the movie theater, and she'd come home exhausted, but treat us to leftover popcorn or nachos, junk food that we'd never dream of buying unless it were free. Each night I rubbed her swollen feet, scented like buttery popcorn and faded jasmine. Jasmine summons our foremothers, voluptuous and strong and feminine, but what makes it unforgettable is what makes it dirty. Indole gives jasmine its intoxicating narcotic note, the aura of shit. Animalic not only in scent, but at sight, jasmine absolute is thick and viscous as menstrual blood. Absolutes are another incarnation of the flower, extracted by a solvent. And when I work with these materials in dilution, it shears the white floral notes, making the oil smell like the living thing. Avasana is a perfume that we know from other lifetimes. In the ancient Hindu tradition, a sense of cosmic deja vu, a scent that we've encountered before. And these vasanas are imprinted in textiles, traces of perfume and natural body oils and dirt locked into the weave of vintage silk, cotton, polyester. Holding the memories of the wearer. My first vasana of jasmine was from when I was about 7 years old. Summertime trip to New York City to visit our grandmother. I arrived very sick. I couldn't stop throwing up the bitter medicines for my bronchitis, so my nanu dipped a pair of cotton balls in her jasmine attar, jasmine flowers steeped in sandalwood oil, and tucked the perfume into my ears. I lay with my head in her lap until the scent of the attar lulled me to sleep. In each breath, I experienced illness, relief, love, family, and history. And on that trip to New York, in my nanu's lap, a serene new sense of home. I weave my family's stories of surviving the war into the narratives that I come across of the Bangladeshi archive, the Liberation War, where women's stories are so often missing from the permanent record. I come across the story of a volunteer during the war who helped free Bangladeshi women held hostage in cantonments by the Pakistan Army. And when she held their naked bodies in the embrace of a sari, the scrap stirred the maternal muscle memory, draping themselves in soft cotton worn down by the oils of their sweat and skin, returning them to femininity, modesty, a wild relief after months living in a nightmare, returning them to a time before war. Thank you so much. I'd like to hand it back to Denise.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone. I have, I'm going to ask actually each person a question, and I think I'm just going to go in order in the way that you presented. You know, so the first question goes to Renee. You know, I love what you said about sort of the ways in which filmmaking and, you know, can be kind of like a way of creating a new archive, you know, a sort of, you know, way in which that, you know, new stories can be told. And particularly, you know, when we think about the archive, as you know, sort of said so nicely, as that being sort of produced by relationships of power, in which, you know, there is, you know, that there's so many of these stories that are and cannot be apprehended in the official record. And, you know, that sort of clip that you showed from Patsy Mink is such, just, I think it's a powerful example of this. You know, I was actually also thinking about other films that you've made. I was remembering, for instance, this moment in your film, My America, or Honk If You Love Buddha. And, you know, that just, you know, a scene with you with being on the road with Yuri Kochiyama. And just like, what a precious moment. You know, Yuri is no longer with us. She passed away in 2014, but, you know, like, we have this moment thanks to your film. And so I'm wondering, Renee, what kinds of thoughts you have had in looking back at your filmmaking, how you've thought about things while, you know, perhaps how you thought about things when you were filming at a given moment, and then looking back now, perhaps from a different vantage point, what are your thoughts? How does the passage of time shape how you think about filmmaking, history, and the archive?
I think, well, you know, I also teach documentary and Asian American studies right now. And my students, I tell my students, well, you're writing the first draft of history. It doesn't matter that you're a student, because a lot of material I've used for different films, No Mas Bebes, which was about immigrant Mexican women who were sterilized coercively at LA County Hospital, or My America and the Asian American series, is the images and the footage we used were created actually by Chicano students, Asian American students, you know, people here in Los Angeles, at UCLA, the first affirmative action program, Ethnocommunications, formed by the Mother Muckers, this kind of roguish group of students of color who said, look, we've got to open up this university to students of color and new filmmakers. And they shot that stuff. I mean, it's among the only images of our communities that are just, you know, human, not about gangs, not about only Lunar New Year or whatever. So it's just crucial that we don't only shoot it, but we preserve it. And so one confession I'll make is, when I got out of college, I was first at Asian Cinevision. I was like the first paid staff person there. And during around 1980, 1981, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Incarceration of Citizens, the hearings on the Japanese American concentration camps were, you know, going around the country. And it came to New York, and Yuri Kochiyama, Bill Kochiyama, and all these really amazing Issei and Nisei survivors of the camps testified. And we filmed it. But I lost it. Like, you know, I was like 21. I don't know what was, I wasn't even thinking that this was important to keep. So I've been making up for that ever since. I mean, somebody found the Chicago hearings, videotape of the Chicago hearings while we were making the series. They found it in a closet somewhere in a school in Chicago. And I said, I'll pay for it. You know, we have to digitize it. Because I remember just like the grief. I live with constant grief that those voices are not, and those images will never be seen because I was such an idiot. My confession. Okay, that's it. Zoom.
You know, I mean, I mean, I think in itself that, you know, just like how much that goes into that, in that documentary film that, you know, that you're filming is sort of incredible. I always think that, you know, documentary filmmakers actually make some of the best historians. I mean, I think, you know, that you're even, you know, that all of, you know, it's like so much of that sort of material. It's really wonderful. Wendy, I have a question for you. I'm just so moved by your artwork, your installation, and you know, I wanted to ask you a question about the tag project. You know, it's such a powerful installation. I'm so struck by, you know, the tags as you've sort of assembled them. They're sort of collective making, how they were created. They were bundled together and hung from a ceiling. And just, I mean, the image that you showed in your slide of you know, them sort of hanging there, you know, I can only imagine what a sight that was. You know, you know, from the images that you showed us, I mean, they almost look kind of ghostly in a way. And so I wondered actually if you could talk about the audience reception for this work. What was it like to present it in public? And do you have a sense of what people thought about it?
Thank you. That's a good question. I really had no expectations as to how people were going to respond to this work. But because it was such a collaborative experience that I think it's really hard for me to say that it's my project. I think it was everybody's project that volunteered. And we had one of the exhibitions in San Diego where many volunteers helped with the tag project. And it was in a gallery, and when the doors opened, everybody came in and immediately they started looking for family members in the bundles. And people were like digging around and looking for names, and many of them found their parents or grandparents, aunts and uncles, and that was pretty rewarding to me. Although the gallery director was panicking because everybody was touching everything, but I said, no, that's okay, don't worry about it, you know. But to me, that was kind of an unexpected response. But in the museum, like in Arkansas, for example, I think what people were the most taken by was the sheer numbers of tags, meaning how many people were forced into these camps, and at some of these camp locations, the population just ran up 20,000 people, like in Poston, which is outside, just in Arizona. So that to me was really the goal, for people to see the sheer number of people that was involved and forced into these camps. So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And a question for Tanaïs. So I mean, I think you've given us so much to really sort of think about, you know, this sort of idea of, you know, memory as sensory, as ephemeral. I mean, even, you know, as a way to think maybe even beyond the object, right? As something that, you know, immaterial. And I was actually reading somewhere that scent was actually an important part of the writing of your other novel as well, Bright Lines, and that it was a line of connection for you between New York City and Bangladesh. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how some of these, to talk about some of these connections, how scent connects you to the different worlds you belong to. I mean, and perhaps even to your world as a writer.
Thank you for the question. I think a lot about how scent is a kind of parallel narrative to the text that I'm creating. I think of the text that I'm writing at this moment as weaving together scraps of the archive. And similarly, when you construct a perfume, you're taking scraps of olfactory material, trying to blend it in a synergistic, composition. And one of the things that I found, especially when I'm trying to summon place, which is such a different way to work with perfume materials than a lot of European white Western perfumery, is I'm trying to actually connect us to ancestral memory. So much of the colonial project was to turn us into caricatures of ourselves. The way that we smelled was one of the ways that we were judged. And I think that in spinning the narrative into and revisioning the narrative into fragrance, it's really wresting back the sort of way that white supremacy had to deem us ridiculous, smelling like we were, less evolved, less civilized, all these kinds of things that are really laced into our narrative. As a person who's of Bangladeshi Muslim descent, I'm also in conversation with another narrative of the hegemony of India and upper caste Hindu narratives that kind of place us outside of, stories of representation in the Asian American landscape. It's often an Indian American story. So I'm getting really specific with scent by taking materials that I can use to build new ways of telling our story. One of the cool things that just happened is I got in touch with a fragrance seller in India, in the perfume capital of India, Kannauj. And he has materials that are iconic to our people, like mendi, henna for our hands, betel leaf, the pan that my grandma would chew with tobacco, roses steeped in sandalwood, jasmine steeped in sandalwood. And he has all of these materials for me to purchase. So we're creating this sort of transnational commercial relationship. But what he's allowing me to do by having access to these raw materials is to reconstruct a narrative of my people that in this time of the virus, I can't even access my people right now. So I think in terms of this fragrance's ability to allow us to travel, to, summon narratives of our ancestors, it has been so powerful. But what makes it really powerful to me is that this is the sense that was really deemed lower than the sense of sight, since the Western world is so ocular centric, since so much of our archive we're forced to be mediated through white institutions, the university, the museum. This sort of, it seeps into the places beyond that specter. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to it. It's very sensuous, without judgment. And it becomes fused with our memory in a way that I think we don't know exactly what's happening. And I think a lot about how another aspect of our selves that was taken from us is our connection to what is mystic or what is supernatural or what is something beyond this earthly life that has all been sort of seen as things that, are not worthy of pursuing academically or in literature. I mean, they're just seen as superstitions. And those are things that my grandmothers were really invested in a way. I mean, these are people who married at age 9 and age 13. So for me to be here speaking to you, it's like, how far has history taken us? And yet this object is still here. These earrings are still here. And these earrings tell a story of a broken marriage, of being an undocumented worker, working in a movie theater, not having access to healthcare. but it's still a symbol of finery for our people. So I'm always looking for how objects are laced with histories that we don't see at first. And I think fragrance really allows us to get in deeper in a way that we aren't.
Wow. Beautiful, thank you. And I think there's, I mean, actually everything that all of you have said, and there's so many connections actually with the other panelists as well. So that I think that'll be a really great, really rich discussion. This ends our second panel. I would like to thank Renee, Wendy, and Tanaïs very much for a very meaningful discussion. We'll now transition to the audience question and answer portion of our program.